What's up guys, Aaron Miles here with On Tilt Gaming. Now that my full set review has been published and it's out there, people have been talking about it, I wanted to kind of narrow the focus a little bit and talk about my top 10 cards from Echoes of the New World. This is a video where I'm going to be going a lot more in-depth onto the specific cards in the set that I thought really stood out in this amazing set. It was actually harder to pick cards for this than it was for Return of the Dragon Emperor. I thought it was very easy to figure, okay, this card's good, this card's not. Because I don't really pick rulers. Once again, rulers will be completely omitted from this video. I do include stones in these top 10 lists. They have to be very breakout stones to make it into the top 10, such as last time I featured Ebon Home. Kaguya's Stone of Sorrow also could have easily made the list. This time around, we saw two stones. Spoiler alert, neither of them are very good, so those won't be featured on this list. But without further ado, going to be going into my top 10 cards from Echoes of the New World. Number 10, we're going to start off this list with a card that a lot of people would probably think should be higher. It's Feli, Genius Ripoff Artist. So the reason that Feli isn't featured very highly on this list is generally, for starters, these lists tend to come out before the sets do. This time I had to wait a little bit. I was sick, had a couple of things to deal with. So this ended up getting put off until after the list, until after the set was released. And I didn't think Feli was actually going to make a huge impact on the format. And based on the GP that we had and the state championships that we had, I was completely correct in that. Feli has made an impact on nothing so far. Sure, there's the cheeky Umarat Towel combo decks, but as I said in my set review, I'm not a fan of the Umarat Towel combo decks. I don't think they're good, I don't think they're consistent, I think they're easily disrupted, all that kind of stuff. So Feli's kind of left in this weird spot of like she's a very powerful card, but she doesn't fit in anywhere just yet. I thought she might make her way into Red Fox. The problem is that the triple red mana that you have to be able to cast her and then activate the ability has just proven to be a little bit too much for a lot of decks. So we're kind of left with this awkward spot of, where is she going to fit in? And it's possible that as far as the L4 meta goes, she doesn't fit in, It's possible that we have to wait until the next cluster comes out to see Feli really come through. But as soon as we kind of get a good red archetype that's non-aggro that can really take advantage of this, you're going to see Feli skyrocket in play. But for now, very strong card. It's just, as I said multiple times, as I'll continue to say, and for the rest of the format, the triple red mana cost is just too high. If she was a single red and two colorless, and then red to activate the ability, we could talk, we'd be in business. But unfortunately, she is not. If you see a red Lumia list come out, I would definitely expect to see Feli in that, as it is a list that, always takes advantage of strong entry triggers. So things like Feli really fit into that deck. The only problem is that red does not seem to be the color that you want to be running in Lumia. I won my states with a Lumia hook that was green, blue, white. Alex Blandon topped the GP in Toronto with green, blue, black. So red's the only color getting left out of those lists. Unfortunately, Feli's just not seeing it right now. But she is still a good enough card to make it into number 10 on this list. Which, seeing some of the other cards on the set, actually is saying something. I do think this card is very powerful. Will be very useful in the future, just not right now, probably not at all this format. Number 9, we have Dark Alice, Manifestation of Rage. So, when I first saw this card, I was like, okay, this is insane, but, Rezard's probably enough. People are going to be playing multiple Rezards, and so far, it's true for some people, but a lot of the time, I think we're just seeing people run one Rezard, and the ability to mass exile your opponent's entire Resonator graveyard, it's just the Resonators, not the whole graveyard, without having to pay any life is a huge advantage against a lot of decks, but not every deck. Which is why I thought Rezard, would really take over the spot of the graveyard management of the format. And for the most part, I've been right. Although we do see a couple Death and Taxes lists running a one of Dark Alice, I'd expect to see more Foxes running a single Dark Alice, just because in the Fox mirror, this card's a house. Like, you get so many counters. As soon as she leaves the field, you get as many black Resonators as she had +1/+1 counters. The only problem is that in the Fox Mirror, like, if they Omit in response, she's going to die with no +1/+1 counters. And then, you're kind of beat, but you kind of force them into a Chimera for 2 mana, and then you can just Omit their Omit. When you get into the, more finer points of Fox Mirrors and the Chimera Wars, you kind of see the value of paying 2 mana to force your opponent's Chimera immediately. But if she actually resolves, like, great, broken. The other part is that she releases the seal abilities of all dark cards, which, for the most part, the releasing of the seals has been widely irrelevant. However, Neo Barrier of Shadows is a powerful card that has been finding its way into a lot of Death and Taxes lists, mostly as a pseudo Tsukiyomi Noble to turn off the mana dorks of the Lumia decks, but also as, kind of a house against Fox if the game does go late enough for you to hit the 8 stones. And, be able to get that, like, if they can't remove Abdul until you get to 8 stones, so they can never Manticore your barrier, or your Neo Barrier of Shadows, then you're in a really good spot. The other thing with the Neo Barrier of Shadows and the Death and Taxes list is that the Lumia lists are running like Dawn of the Earth, and if you go into Butterfly into a 2-drop, you know, they figure you're going for Abdul, they Dawn of the Earth, they pick the first mode. You can now just grab your Neo Barrier of Shadows, and, you know, that kind of counteracts that whole part. And then once you drop the Dark Alice, they're immediately shut off of all non-will activated abilities, which houses a lot of matchups. It's very good against, you know, Death and Taxes because they can't pump with 0 anymore. It's very good against, you know, anything that plays Mana Dorks. It's obviously very good against Fox. Like, this is just a powerful 2-card combo. But obviously Neo Barrier of Shadows is the weaker of the two pieces, you know, between this and Neo Barrier. This is the stronger card, that's why this makes it onto the list. And overall, this card just does a lot for you, a lot of good things. There's really no downside to this. Sure, it's a 2-mana 5/5, but for the most part, it's going to be at least a 2-mana 6/6, 2-mana 7/7, somewhere along those lines. Generally not something you want to be playing on turn 2, but it's totally fine. It's a later game card that, you know, you play it and then you leave open Seal mana because you're playing it around Severing Winds kind of thing. Just overall, very versatile, very good. Absolutely like this card. Number 8 is Release. Now, when a lot of people, they've been asking me for my Lumia list, and I send it to them, and so far, without a doubt, the first thing that everybody has said to me is just Release ? Because they don't know what the card is. So I really wanted to highlight this card. I am in love with this card. Anybody that's talked to me about anything in like the past few formats knows that I've been in love with Memory of Disappearance. I've been trying to find a way to make that work because I just love the idea. Being a Yu-Gi-Oh player, I love the idea of being able to use my exiled, remove from game area as a resource. And Release really lets you do that. So you put a non-Magic Stone card from your moved area into your hand, you draw a card. So the reason that this is so powerful, in my opinion, is because Horn of the Sacred Beast is banned. So there's no more shuffling graveyards back into decks, so the only way to deal with your opponent using their graveyard as a resource is with Rezard or Dark Alice, you know, things that make them exile, you know, their graveyard. So when you suddenly have access back to your exiled cards, it's not really something that your opponent thinks about. They kind of count those cards out of the game. When I was playing Lumia, I would have anybody that stuck a Rezard on the field would, anytime I would like go to kill the Rezard or like get it off the field, they would immediately be like, okay, well, you know, now I have to like exile all this stuff from his grave that I don't want him to get back with Frigg. And, you know, Frigg is a card that we've seen be extremely powerful since its release. You know, playing it in Lumia Myths, or not Lumia Myths, sorry, Prisia Myths. It was a side deck card as a 4-of, and pretty much every Prisia Myth deck. It was your way to beat control. You would just, you know, summon Frigg, skip back Frigg, and something else. So, while it doesn't necessarily fit into what Prisia Myths would have done, I think the newer decks that play Frigg, you know, this is a powerful tool for them. As well as just any deck that plays its own Rezard. Like, you can just exile a card from your own graveyard and be like, okay, now it's, you know, it's set and primed for me to release it back later. Overall, plus it's a +1. Like, it is 100% always a +1. It's a card that doesn't target, so, you know, you kind of get to leave that up to resolution to be like, okay, yeah, you know, so, like, I'll get this back. Like, if you play this, and then your opponent seals it, and then you seal that, and they Severing Winds, and you Severing Winds back or something, and then you're like, okay, well, you know, I have a Rezard on field or something, I can now exile, like one of the seals or one of the Severing Winds, and get that back, you know, as this card resolves. Because you can play this with an empty exile, and then exile something as it's resolving, or not as it's resolving, obviously, but like, you know, when it's on the chase still, and then get that back, which is actually pretty relevant if you're playing a black-white deck. So this is something I could even see being played in like Death and Taxes if they start to play more Rezards. But I personally don't think that's going to happen. But, you know, just kind of spitballing that idea out there. Overall, really, really like this card. And I might be the only one, and that's fine. It's been working for me, and I love the concept. So, let's see where that goes for me for the rest of the format. Okay, number 7 is Zero Circle of Protection. Originally, I liked Luna's Attendant more, and then, you know, playing it in things that weren't playing 10 Bluestones suddenly started to feel really bad. So, Zero Circle of Protection is an extremely strong card, particularly out of sideboard, because there are a lot of decks that don't get Heavenly Gust sided in against them. For example, like Lumia Hook. I'm going to probably go back to Lumia Hook as an example for a lot of these cards because it is A, the deck that I have the most experience with so far this format, 2, the deck that I believe to be one of the top 3, if not the top deck so far this format. I think it's like between Lumia, Fox, and a third deck, probably Prisia, but obviously I have a lot more exploring to do. But overall, Lumia Hook's probably going to be where a lot of my examples come from because I do think that is one of the stronger decks of the format. So going off what I was saying, nobody sides in Heavenly Gust against Lumia. It's a deck that doesn't play any additions. You're not going to get any value off of it. Maybe you care about killing the Wind Secluded that they may or may not main deck, but for the most part, people aren't going to care about getting it back. I'm like siding in addition hate against Lumia. It just doesn't happen. So suddenly you bring in this card, and then they don't have an answer for it. You know, even post board, they're going to have to wait until game 3 before they can get an answer to this card, and this can just hose the control matchup. You know, this is the kind of thing that makes straight black-blue control no longer playable, because they don't have any answers to additions, and before it was, okay, yeah, they have a Wind Secluded and I can't deal with that, it's kind of inconvenient. But all of a sudden you throw this down, you call barrier black, and your opponent, sure, they can like bear magic your Captain Hook when you attack, but then they can't actually remove it, because they can't unseen pressure it, they can't space-time it, they can't heteroclite Excalibur or anything. All of a sudden you don't need Wind Secluded, you are just an untargetable mass throughout your entire deck. Your mana dork's suddenly going to live through everything, and it's a card that you can Kaguya Moonbeam Butterfly out. And then let's say they do side in Heavenly Gust. They're like, alright, yeah, you know, I'm aware that Zero's Circle of Protection exists, I'm aware that they're going to side it in. If you're playing Lumia, I was playing Frigg in Lumia. I think it's a very good idea. All of a sudden, you have an addition that you can now get back on top of your spell and Resonator, and you're not losing out on any value to get this back. And your opponent's Heavenly Gust is probably going to sit in their graveyard for the rest of the game. You get to replay this card, you get insane value out of it, and this can just steamroll a game. Lumia's Attendant I thought was cooler at first, but the consistent mana to have to pay to give things barrier, on top of the fact that they can like respond to you giving it barrier, it's been pretty meh. The other important thing to note about this card is that it has been errated, so it no longer says as this card enters your field. Or wait, did it say when? Basically, it was worded either as either was or has become when, I don't remember. And it basically came down to the point where if you Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly this out, you would have to declare the activated ability, or the automatic ability would go onto the chase of you declaring an attribute. You would pick the attribute at resolution, but your opponent could respond to you, you know, having that automatic ability trigger, and now they can't. Once you butterfly this in, you immediately call the color, and they can't respond to it in any way, whereas previously they could. So the errata made this card stronger. I just don't remember which wording it was. I'll have to look it up in a bit. But overall, a very solid card, very solid side deck choice for any white deck, any deck that's playing Moonbeam Butterfly. And it's one of the reasons that I think Control is definitely going to struggle in the upcoming format. Number 6 is Gil Lapis, Usurper of Maddening Power. So I've always loved Gil Lapis cards. He's probably my favorite character from the lore of Force of Will. I identify very strongly with his ideals, as I too am trying to take over the world, except I succeeded. But this card just does a lot of things. The ability to search Darkness or Light Chant with total cost 1, there's not a whole lot that's been super relevant. I've spent a few days going through the black and white 1-cost chants in the format, just going over it in my head. I actually haven't looked into this card's power level in Wanderer just yet. Something I've been meaning to do that I'll look forward to more in the future. But for the most part, you get to grab Heteroclite Excalibur, or you get to grab Nameless Mist, another card that I think is very powerful in this format. You know, you get to look at your opponent's hand, hit their Severing Winds, and all of a sudden, you know if they have more copies of Severing Winds, you know, Seal of Wind and Light Save in their hand. So the ability to search Nameless Mist is something that I value very highly in this upcoming format. And I know that this has been a very powerful card for Death and Taxes, you know, being able to grab Final Battle, Heteroclite Excalibur, maybe even Unseen Pressure. Like, there are just a surprising amount of powerful one-drop chants in Darkness. Light, not so much, but definitely the dark ones. Then you add on to the fact that this guy is Target Attacker, now known as Precision, and he's a 6/7, meaning that he can attack Abdul and just kill him. Like, just outright. Like, you get a Target Attack Abdul with this 6/7, and Abdul dies. It's great. I absolutely love it. And then, mostly irrelevant is that he gets +1/+1 for each other Will of Despair Resonator that you have, which, for the most part, you're only going to be counting himself, maybe Rezard, because I believe Dark Alice is Will of Hope for whatever reasons. Probably some kind of lore thing, but I'm not going to lie, I don't pay much attention to the lore. But pretty much any card that's going to come in, say, I can kill Abdul, and if there's no Abdul on the field, then I get an automatic +1, is very strong in my book. So, well, we'll see how he goes into the format coming in. I don't think he's seen play in any top lists, except outside of, like, Death and Taxes, but, we'll see where it goes. We have Zero the King's Blade. So this card, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a quick cast card that says your opponent can't draw more than 1 card per turn. And then Resonators you control cannot be returned to their owner's hand has actually proven to be extremely difficult for me as a Lumia player to deal with, because in my original Lumia hook list, I was running Rachel, the Inheritance, double blue, bounce card to your opponent's hand, and that was my Abdul answer because, you know, it can't be Severing Winds, it can't be sealed, it doesn't count as you playing a card that turn. And then if they ever flashed into 0, the first King's Blade, or sorry, just the King's Blade, not the first King's Blade, I don't know why I said that, then I would suddenly have a very hard time dealing with Abdul. And I would be down a card, and, I mean, this card's just a huge inconvenience, and it's not small. Like, 2 mana 6/6s actually put you on quite a bit of a clock, especially if they go, like, it's very possible. One of the things that I ran into was Death and Taxes would, like, you know, I would win the die roll, I would go first, and then, like, they would energize into this card, and then the next turn they would play Abdul, and all of a sudden they've got out 2 6/6s, and I'm a deck that's really not playing cards for, like, I'm not playing anything substantial until I hit, like, 5 mana. And now that it doesn't have its enter abilities, because there's an Abdul on the field, like, I'm just kind of eating 1200 damage a turn, which you can't do that for very long before you lose the game. So I definitely think this card is appropriately statted. I think its continuous ability is very powerful. I think that the quick cast on it is really what puts it over the top. If it didn't have quick cast, you know, this card would be kind of mediocre. I'd be like, sure, you know, it's just a little too easy to see coming, but the ability to respond to their draw triggers with this card can really put your opponent at a significant disadvantage if you can play this at the appropriate time. And it's not great against a lot of decks, but it is an absolute house against the decks that it is good against, and it's a solid body. So, you know, overall, this card's doing a lot of what you want your 2-drops to be doing, and another quick cast card never hurt anybody. Number 4 is Rezard, King of the Damned. It's probably one of my favorite cards from the set. Everybody knows me and that I love Rezard. It's kind of just stemmed and took on a minus event, irrelevant. So, pay 200 life to remove target card in the graveyard from the game. This card gains +1/+1 for each resonator in your removed area. That last part seems to be a part that a lot of people misread. I was playing against Death and Taxes at States, and my opponent, like, attacked, and I blocked with a Melfi, and he went, okay, pay 200 life, remove your seal. And I was like, okay, tell me you don't think this kills my Melfi now. And he's like, why wouldn't it kill you? He's like, why would it not kill your Melfi? I'm like, oh my god, read your card. But, you know, being able to pump it for yourself, like just exiling your own guys to get them up really big, can be pretty useful. But for the most part, the amount of grave control that he does is insane. He's not once per turn. He's either player's graveyard, he's instant speed, and that's really what we needed with a Hornband. This is the kind of card that's going to keep Fox under control. You know, they're gonna, you know, you gotta exile their Killing Stones from the get-go. If they respond to, like, shuffle it back in with Fox, you gotta respond with this ability again and just remove it. So one of the cards that didn't make this list is, I don't remember his name. It's the 2 mana 3/3 that pays 500 life to revive himself from the graveyard tapped. I really think that Rezard handles that beautifully because they really can't afford to pay 500 life in response to you paying 200 life over and over again. That's not going to work out for them in the long run, or even in the short run. Like, they're just not going to get their card. They're going to be down like 3,500 life, and you're going to be down like 1,000. So 200 life very appropriately costed for this card. You know, it's easy to get kind of out of hand with this card. You can be like, oh yeah, you know, I'm just going to remove his whole graveyard, but like, you can't do that. Don't do that. You have to play smart with this card. And it seems easy to play smart with it, and I think it is, but sometimes, you know, people get a little out of hand with things like this. They're like, I am all powerful, I can remove everybody's graveyard at all times. And that's really not what it is. But, you know, a graveyard control card with this, and like this, that has the ability to make itself bigger, definitely earns a spot on this list. I believe this is the highest placed Resonator on this list. And I would definitely stand by the fact that I think he's the best Resonator in the set. I think he's a card that, you know, we've seen shine in the beginning of the format. He's a card that I think we're going to see shine until the end of the format. And probably going forward, since he is in the same set as Frigg. I mean, if, you know, because Frigg's going to be legal as long as he's legal, I think you're going to continue to see this guy in the meta until he rotates, which is very powerful. Absolutely love it. Number 3, probably my second favorite card from the set is Dawn of the Earth. So, you know, blue-white modal spell, when we first saw this, we were like, what the fuck card is, like, what deck is going to play blue-white? So it does 3 modes. It has 3 modes. All of them are relevant abilities, and all of them say draw a card. And up until recently, I thought that the first ability, this turn, if a Resonator would be put into your opponent's field without being played, remove it from the game instead, draw a card. I thought that I don't know why. I never read the card. People kept reading it to me, so I assumed I knew what it did. I'm really bad about not reading cards. I thought that only meant the next instance of your opponent putting a card into play without playing it, and it turns out it's until the end of turn, which is more bonkers than I thought it was, and I already thought this card was insane. So, you know, that first ability deals with chimeras. No, deals with chimeras, deals with Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly, deals with Lumia Flickers, deals with, you know, Priscia, Spinning Myths, all that kind of stuff. Jack, Climbing the Beanstalk. There's just a lot of things. Anytime there's a lot of cheating into the game that has been, you know, really become prevalent over the last two formats. You know, for a while now, people haven't been playing cards from their hand for their mana cost. That's just not an effective way to play the game. The only deck that really does that is like Lumia Hook and Death and Taxes, but Death and Taxes plays Butterfly. Lumia Hook usually plays Butterfly as well, but they also have the Flicker ability, which you can stop with that. And so the second ability is probably the one that I love the most, is you give your guy +2/+2. I'm sorry, you recover your Resonator, give it +2/+2, give it Barrier, and draw a card. And that actually gives a lot of OTK potential, I've come to find. Like, I'll be sitting there, and I'll have a Captain Hook, and I'll be like, okay, let me, you know, attack with this Captain Hook. Once the Chrono blocks, I give him, you know, the +2/+2 untap Barrier. All of a sudden, he hits them for 12, and then he can attack again for 12, and then he can Flicker at the end of turn. And just 2,400 damage off of a Captain Hook that you actually can't target the second time around is insane. It's great to be able to respond to your opponent doing things with the Barrier. It's great to be able to untap when they enter combat to make your guys not be able to be attacked, kind of thing. It's just a lot of uses to that second ability. Lot. And then the third one, you know, you remove all zero-cost cards from the game and draw a card. I'm sorry, that your opponent controls. Not all zero-cost cards, just all the zero-cost cards that your opponent controls, which includes tokens. So tokens and Regalia, for the most part, is what you're going to be getting with this card. Unless it's a token copy of a card. Like if you Phalia Griffin, it has a cost of 6. But for the most part, Elf tokens and the tokens created off of Dark Alice, probably the two most relevant ones you're going to see in this game. Maybe Conjure Time Bomb every now and then. You know, it exiles all of them. And then you draw a card. So you don't have to play Heavenly Gust anymore in like Lumia Hook. Definitely using Lumia Hook as an example for this card because it is the only deck I know of that is actually white-blue that's relevant in the meta. There might be one or two more popping up, but for the most part, I think Lumia Hook's going to be the only deck you're seeing run Dawn of the Earth. It's a little bit too hard for Death and Taxes to go into blue. And they don't really get a lot out of it outside of Dawn of the Earth. So, overall, 3 amazing abilities that all say draw a card. Only problem with this card is that it is kind of color locked into one deck, but I think this is another thing that really puts that one deck over the top. So, that's why it gets the number 3 slot, not 2 or 1. Number 2 goes to Heteroclite Excalibur. 1 mana kill a guy, you lose 500 life. I'm sorry, 1 mana exile a guy, which brings us back to release. Anyway, so that's another thing, is that this exiles it so your opponent, you know, they can't last drop it, they can't Dance of Shadows, they can't End of Days, whatever it is. And you lose 500 life. And then the Gil Lapis Resonator that I featured earlier stops you from losing that life. So, like, with him, you just search Heteroclite Excalibur, you play it, you lose nothing. Your opponent exiles a Resonator for 1 black mana. So, 1 mana sorcery speed removal, really good. The biggest thing about this card is that it is an answer to Abdul for Fox. That's really what put this card out in my mind immediately, was that, okay, yeah, Fox suddenly has an Abdul answer, a good Abdul answer, because, like, yeah, Shade's cool, Dark Purge is cool. The problem is that if you're playing against Death and Taxes, they can pump it out of the 600 range, and all of a sudden you're in for kind of a rough time. That's why I ran Space-Time Collapse in GP Toronto when I topped with Fox. I didn't trust the 600 damage to be enough to deal with Abduls consistently, because I knew Death and Taxes was a rough matchup, and 7/7 Abdul's just a little bit too hard to deal with. Even if I ran into a random Gil Alhamat that's like playing Nameless Mist and they put a +1/+1 counter on their Abdul, like, your 600 damage removal is not enough. So Heteroclite Excalibur, 1 mana, doesn't really disrupt your plays for the turn because the mana cost is so low. You know, it's a little bit different now that Severing Winds came out, because you can't really like play but but for the most part, I'm very glad that this card was printed. I think that the life loss is actually pretty fair. You know, a lot of people were complaining that this card's not quick cast, and if this card were quick cast, oh my god, like, it'd be a little bit too insane. Like, you just play Abdul, you end your turn, like, okay, exile your Abdul, haha. Because there's no condition to it. If it said remove target non-darkness resonator from the game, you lose 500 life and it's quick cast, that card's actually still really broken, but I wouldn't like it nearly as much because it doesn't kill Abdul. That's my problem with Black Lightning. But, you know, there's not a lot of text on this card, so it's kind of, you know, hard to talk about it at length, because it should be very obvious why this is good. You know, 1 mana kill spells. That's 1 mana non-conditional kill spells. Very powerful. And then number 1, much to the surprise of nobody, Severing Winds. This card kind of changes how the game is played. You know, all of a sudden you have a much harder time kind of comboing off. It's one of the reasons that I didn't choose to play Fox at the start of this format. I found that Lumia Hook has a much easier time only playing 1 card a turn. And then this card makes Counter Wars even more insane. Where it's like, I'll play a Captain Hook, they'll seal it, I'll seal that, they'll Severing Winds it, and then all of a sudden, like, seal Captain Hook is not enough to, you know, jam down a Captain Hook, which makes playing Lumia Hook a little bit scarier, but it's something that I thought was pretty confident in my ability to do. This card single-handedly kind of killed Featsing. I know a couple people will argue with me that Featsing is still alive, but I think that's one of those things that's more trouble than it's worth. When I see a card that says I can no longer play Gwyber for 1 mana, you know, that's not something I'm going to be looking into and trying to fix. So the question has come up to me a lot. Like, a lot of people have been asking, how many copies of this card do I run? Especially if I am not in color to hardcast it. So I think that this card should be a 2 of, at least, in pretty much every deck, with the exception of maybe aggro decks. Like, if you're playing Prisia, I still think you play this card because you're in color for it. If you're playing, like, Tree Burn, I don't think you play this card. I think you're a little bit too tight on, you know, how many cards you can draw, like, how many cards you can see and still operate properly. Do with this card in pretty much everything, except, like, Burn. I think you play 3 of this card if you're playing a, you know, a deck that isn't aggro. You know, it's just very powerful to be able to limit your opponent's choices for what they can do on a turn, and it's very important that you see at least 1 so that you can force them to play around it for the rest of the game, which is why I think 3 is the correct number. If you only play 2, you might not see it, and then the first time they stick a second card, they're like, okay, he doesn't even run it, and they'll continue to not play around it, and because you're only running 2, it'll be very difficult for you to draw it and then punish them for not playing around it. And then if you are playing a deck that can reasonably hardcast this card, and by that very specifically I mean Fox and Lumia, then I think you should play 4 of this card. Because you will get to a point, you know, either through Griffins or through enough mana dorks, where you can just hardcast this card and it's suddenly very powerful on top of how strong it already is, and they'll like play around it and it's like, oh, I know you played around it, but I can actually just cast this for 4 mana on the first card you played this turn. And then once you have multiples, oh my god, forget about it. Having multiples of this card feels insane. Especially if you can hardcast it. Like, you play the first one, they're like, well, obviously he doesn't have a second one. He just played the first one on my first card. Now I'm fine to play a second card, and then throw down that second one, and they're just pretty much lose the game on the spot. So this is a card that I think you're going to be seeing as a 2 to 4 of in everything, with the exception of maybe Burn going forward in the format, and very likely until this card's rotation. So this is Force of Will now. You have to be wary of this card. It kind of kills combo decks. You know, I'm interested to see the impact that this has on Wanderer, because if you are looking at decks with their topping records, Arla 2.0 is still the second best deck in Wanderer. Sure, it, you know, had its big burst at the beginning of the format and then fell off and actually hasn't topped in like over a month. It still has the second highest number of tops because of how powerful it was at the start of the format. And in New Frontiers and Wanderer, I'm pretty sure this just kills Arla 2.0, because their whole thing was they would torrent a Final Breeze and then, you know, play their secret technique, but all of a sudden you can't torrent cards reliably in a format where everybody's running 3 to 4 Severing Winds. So unfortunately I think decks like that are kind of out. I think it does narrow down the format a bit, really solidify the top decks as things like Fox, Lumia Hook, decks that can reasonably hardcast this card, which is something people might not have been thinking of when they really jam 4 copies of this into a deck, but overall, you know, I don't hate this card. I don't really hate how it makes me play the game because I do think it's actually kind of easy to just play into and then, you know, get around it. That's how you beat counterspells. You play into them. You don't sit there and like, oh man, you know, he just has a counterspell. I can never play a card. No, you have to run them out of them. You have to play into it. You have to waste your counterspells on their counterspells. It's kind of hard for me to say that like I enjoy that kind of play style, but it's something that I've found that I'm pretty good at. So, you know, I'm okay with formats like these where everybody's running like 4 Seal, 4 Severing Winds, and if you're not running Seal, and you're just running Severing Winds, then all of a sudden I feel at a significant advantage because I'm playing Lumia Hook. Like, I have 4 Seal, I have Severing Winds, like, I have more counter spells than you. That means I'm probably going to win this game if I can, you know, survive the early turns kind of thing. It's a whole nother thing. And not a discussion for right now. But, point is, Severing Winds, easily the best card of the set. I don't think you're going to find a pro player that disagrees with me on that one. So yeah, that's, you know, that's the format going forward is Severing Winds. That's also my top 10 list. That's the end of it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to get back to you, or just message me on Facebook personally, Aaron Miles. And I will see you guys next time when the next set drops. Have a good one.